Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're checking out the brand new PlayStation VR 2, but this won't be a boring unboxing or simple review, as the majority of you who are interested in this product most likely already watch footage from big name channels or other news outlets. So instead, I have plenty of supplemental information that'll let you know if this headset is right for you. We'll go over all the pros and cons, and finally I'll call out some BS that I'm already seeing about this headset. I'm even going to try my best to look at this from the perspective of someone who's never tried VR at all. Now, I'd love to hear your comments along the way on what you agree and disagree with, and there are of course the links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead. But before we jump in, we just need to take care of one thing.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Okay, so now that that's done, let's start this video off by discussing the dreaded cable. Is cabled VR gaming really that unbearable? This is a major talking point that I'm constantly seeing being thrown around, mainly by people who want to discredit this headset, but also other news outlets. The cable has become VR's dirty word, and yes, you will still need to deal with a tether in 2023. Now, I know it can be really hard to go backwards. Once you have something, living without it can be really rough, but the cable does come with some pros and cons. A cable means consistency, and for the PlayStation VR 2, it's just a necessary evil. Meta was extremely reluctant to get into wireless game streaming, mainly due to the inconsistent experience that users would get. Now, in the PlayStation VR's case, that can be resolved with standardized hardware, but that would incur a significant price increase to the headset. So if you want to experience the games that Sony has to offer, you'll just have to deal with a cable. But trust me, even if you're used to wireless gaming, you will adjust to this, and in my opinion, the gaming benefits are worth it. I constantly switch back and forth between tethered and wireless, and personally, I enjoy my tethered experiences much more. Even using multiple wireless options, including AirLink, Virtual Desktop, Vive's adapter, and even Meta's own Wi-Fi adapter, my experience is always far from perfect. Random updates tend to break something, or I can never find the right balance between clarity and latency. Now, I'm personally very sensitive to latency, and before you ask, I am using all of this equipment under the ideal circumstances. I have a high-speed Wi-Fi 6 router, my PC is on an Ethernet connection to it, and I'm gaming right next to the setup. It doesn't matter what encoder I use or bitrate I set, it just doesn't feel the same or have the same ease of use as my Valve Index. There's only a small handful of games where that cable becomes an annoyance, and I've even run around my room throwing jump kicks without experiencing any cable snags. Now, standalone VR does accommodate my latency needs, but the graphical fidelity is extremely limited, and it doesn't have all the games I enjoy. So cabled VR really comes down to what concessions you're willing to make. Sure, it's definitely not ideal, and I would consider it a minor annoyance rather than a major deterrent. Now, another aspect that we have to discuss is the PlayStation VR has a very strong but imperfect game lineup. Horizon Call of the Mountain isn't exactly the Half-Life Alyx killer that some people expected it to be. As a flagship title, it's also a bit VR beginner oriented. Now, the other AAA caliber games that Sony has to offer just aren't for everyone, as both horror and sim racing don't have the same mainstream appeal as both shooters or action-adventure. They're definitely genres that people love, but it's a smaller group. To cover all genres and appeal to everyone, the PlayStation VR 2 still needs titles like Astrobot for the platformers, and Call of Duty or Fortnite for the shooter fans. Additionally, other genres only have indie representation, with titles that have been ported over from the Quest 2. The VR space in general lacks MOBAs and strategy titles. And finally, the PlayStation VR 2 has a much smaller library than any other VR platform out there. So they definitely have some gaps to fill, room to grow, and their future titles are still a bit uncertain, which I'll be discussing later in this video. And this brings us right to, are games actually better on the PlayStation VR 2? And this is definitely a loaded question that I'm sure many people will have strong opinions about. The combination of PlayStation's optimized hardware, foveated rendering, and the introduction of head haptics and adaptive triggers definitely does enhance titles for the average user. If you're coming from a Quest 2, the upgrade is extremely significant. But just like anyone who's gone through multiple PC upgrades, or even experienced games with remastered graphics, the title could definitely look a lot better, but it's still the same game. Now, graphics play a much more significant role in VR, so I don't want to underemphasize this aspect, but it's literally not a game changer. Now, if you're coming from an extremely high-end PC with all the bells and whistles and latest technology, I would still say that the PlayStation VR 2 delivers a great experience. And remember, I am a member of the glorious PCVR Master Race, rocking an RTX 4090. You could definitely get higher resolutions, greater FOVs, and more frames on certain PCs, but compared to what the average gamer is rocking, the PlayStation 5 does provide a lot of horsepower, and I actually replayed a lot of PCVR games that I'm familiar with, and it really is hard to judge which one is actually better. But let's move into this headset's pros and cons. Now, in order to truly do this, we need to stop the fanboyism and acknowledge that each platform has its own pros and cons. When it comes to the PSVR 2, the advantages are clear. This is a headset that focuses primarily on gaming, and it's finally bringing AAA quality titles back to VR. Now, I've already discussed that the game selection is currently limited, but if your goal is VR games that go beyond casual, or of budgets that go beyond the indie level, this is the platform for you. Meta is spending a lot of time, money, and effort on other aspects like the metaverse and augmented reality, and even while PCVR can provide a superior experience, almost no one is developing exclusive PCVR titles these days, so there's nothing taking advantage of its enhanced hardware. And speaking of hardware, the PlayStation VR 2 is just the perfect combination of new features and mandatory concessions. The adaptive triggers, head haptics, and foveated rendering all shine, but if you're not already a PlayStation 5 owner, this is a really expensive method to break into VR. While the headset itself is reasonably priced, the combination of a PS5 and PSVR 2 starts at $950. Unless you're also into console gaming, this definitely isn't VR's best value, which still goes to the Quest 2 or possibly the Pico 4. Now, if you've never experienced VR before, the PlayStation VR 2 is an excellent introduction. There's an extreme wow factor that comes with VR that admittedly some people are oddly immune to, but for the majority of us, you will put on the headset and instantly be transported, and you might have to pick your jaw up from the floor a few times. It's undeniably stunning, and if you've gone this long without ever experiencing VR, you are in for a fantastic ride. If you try in this headset and it has no impact on you at all, then VR is just not right for you. This headset and its combination of features should not only impress, but even overwhelm you a little bit. This is what newcomers should expect. Now, those quote-unquote upgrading from a Quest 2 should also feel truly impressed, but not as overwhelmed. As a Quest gamer, you should have adapted to VR. But again, this is highly subjective, and not everyone reacts the same way, but this is my expectation of how the majority of gamers will respond. Now, an obvious question that very few people seem to address is who should buy the PlayStation VR 2? Now, it's your money, and you could decide on whatever you want, but I'm hoping to help you with that decision. If you're currently a PlayStation 5 owner and want to get into VR, or you're a VR enthusiast who wants to experience everything, then it's easy for me to recommend this headset. PS5 owners are not only getting a whole new way to experience their flat screen titles, as the PlayStation VR 2 offers a virtual theater mode, but you're also getting a whole new way to jump into some of these existing game worlds, and you really don't want to miss titles like Gran Turismo 7, Resident Evil Village, or Horizon from a first-person VR view. It'll feel more like you're living these games now rather than just playing them. And for the PCVR enthusiasts out there, you're going to want to experience what Sony has to offer. We're always chasing the next great thing, and while it's not exactly the PlayStation VR 2 headset itself, it's what the VR industry as a whole has been missing, and that's high-quality games. Sure, some of these titles may eventually be ported to PCVR, but that's currently uncertain, which is our final topic of today. As excited as I am for the PlayStation VR 2, which has truly revitalized my love of VR, both the future of this headset and the VR industry itself are still in question. Basically, every other major player besides Sony and Meta are currently pulling out of VR. And while there's a handful of exciting launch titles you can't get anywhere else, with a few more exciting titles on the way, like Firewall Ultra and Crossfire Sierra Squad, but after that, it's a big question mark. Microsoft has recently gobbled up a couple studios, so that may limit what comes to the PlayStation in the future. We don't know if Sony will continue to throw money at VR, so it might eventually just be populated with Quest ports. While I don't personally think that's the case, this could become a reality because the potential sales of this headset are not looking fantastic. When the original PlayStation VR went on sale, there were roughly 50 million more PlayStation 4 gamers out there compared to the number of PS5 owners today. The new PlayStation VR 2 would have to sell about 10 times better than the original one did to match Quest 2 sales, and the reason why that's so significant is because developers focus on the most popular hardware. So if there's no money to be made on the PlayStation VR 2, we'll be back to Quest 2 and eventually Quest 3 games, which will get ported onto the PlayStation. Now again, this is a bit of a doomsday scenario, and I don't expect it to play out exactly like this, as Sony can tap into the PCVR market and also prioritize those two platforms for right now, and later make additional money by porting to the Quest 3 only. But for now, we'll have to wait and see what happens, and I truly hope that this video provided you some additional information on the PlayStation VR 2 that you're just not getting anywhere else. If you have any additional questions or comments, I'd love to hear them, and I will get back to you.
And that was today's video, brought to you by my dad, Mateo's 311. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here,
Consider subscribing.
consider
Consider subscribing.
consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing.
We'll see you guys on next time.
We'll see you guys on next time.